We're here in New York on a seemingly appropriately gray and chilly day to talk about this pretty extraordinary picture, Synecdoche, New York. And that was my interpretation of Catherine Keener's character. I saw the movie in Cannes, because that's how I roll, and I think I got a vibe from the whole Cannes press audience this year that there was actually an almost active hostility to really personal films, Synecdoche, New York being one of them, and Philippe Garrel's The Frontier of Dawn, a film that played at Cannes and is not very likely to get wide exposure in America anytime soon or anytime ever. Those were two pictures that had such an individual and uncompromising and very personal vision that were that garnered reactions of you know, either muted or outright hostility, which was kind of interesting. I think this movie, looking at it again and thinking about it more and thinking about the things the people at this table have written about it, it's interesting because the whole the whole trope of life as theater is, in fact, one of the oldest in literature and in and in art, and I think maybe that would be a interesting place to start.
Well, being a huge fan of Kaufman's work as a screenwriter, I wanted to go into this film knowing nothing about it. I didn't read anything from Cannes. I was tempted to, but I didn't. And I went to a fairly early press screening and was sort of devastated by it. I wound up rushing out of the room quickly because there were a lot of people there who were not fans of it. Their immediate reaction was less than positive, and I just had to get away. And wound up sitting in a bar till very late at night, drinking by myself, getting very drunk, which hasn't happened before from a film. So there was certainly that immediate reaction.
Life itself usually does that, not the film.
Exactly. So
yeah, this film made me miserable for 2 weeks.
and I finally found up the courage to go see it a second time once it was playing in the theaters. It was kind of spur of the moment, and I went into the theater. It was very crowded, which was wonderful, and somewhat less than the first time, but still as devastating and as it was today, watching it again right before this. So.
Yeah, you did some really interesting work in what you wrote about it, about Cotard syndrome.
What is Cotard syndrome? I mean, we've
I should
alluded to it.
I should let it.
It's this belief that you are dead.
Are dead.
You know,
Right.
or decaying.
And that you don't have parts of limbs or
That's
something. Right. That, you know, it progresses. I guess you don't have an arm, or I don't have blood in my body is another one. And of course, there's a line with Olive, and you know, I don't want blood. I don't want blood. But it's just sort of this steady, increasing self-denial. You know, which is fascinating because it is solipsistic at the same time that it's self-denying, right?
And the tattoo that falls off. Yeah.
And I like the Hope Davis character, and again with the weird feet, or right, you're rotting from the outside. But the Hope Davis character at one point says, "Why did you? Kill yourself?" Okay. And he asks her to repeat herself, "Why would you?" But there is this sort of idea that, you know, this whole thing is maybe a death fugue or something. And then there's a syndrome associated with that called Capgras syndrome. And there's the scene in here where he's actually going to the apartment to go clean for the first time and be mistaken for his anima, I guess. And he's pressing the buttons, and one of the people on the address board is Capgras, Mr.
Really?
Capgras. And what Capgras syndrome is, you mistake other people for strangers. And when he's kind of ranting in front of his crew, he says something like, you know, you wake up one day and your wife is a stranger to you. And that's sort of indicative of that sort of thing, this kind of, you're suddenly a stranger in your life. And I think it forces you to be introspective. I think it forces you to kind of lay yourself bare, if you will, in order to appreciate it fully. And I think people are very hostile towards that, especially people like that can't really stand a lot of that scrutiny, perhaps, that introspection.
Agreed.
Yeah, I didn't see it at Cannes, and if I remember correctly, it was because they press screened it late, but was listening to the Cannes buzz for months before I eventually saw it in Toronto. And I remember the first time I saw the film, I felt like I spent most of it trying to get my bearings and trying to figure out what was going on. And it wasn't really until when, you know, spoiler alert, when Hazel dies that I started to really feel the first time I saw it. And by the end of that first screening, I was in tears. But then the second time I saw the film, I kind of started falling apart immediately because I had some frame of reference from which to watch it. And then these mysteries started becoming sort of started like revealing themselves to me. And watching it a third time, there's still so many things there's still so much work to do when you watch it. And that's really exciting to me, but I think that is one of the things that makes people really hostile, because there are so few films in our marketplace right now that actually ask you to do something when you watch them.
Right.
Yeah. For me, this movie was like a red alarm that life is fleeting, that you have to make every moment count. And it's so utterly devastating when it also recognizes the fact that not only is life precious, but that it is so hard to live the good life.
I think it's sort of remarkable that Kaufman chose this as his first film to direct, and it's such a complex structural exercise. You know, I think the easy comparison in American film is probably to David Lynch. It reminded me a lot of Mulholland Drive as I was watching it, and when I was sitting down trying to write about it, you know, I was stricken with sort of the same issues that I was stricken with most David Lynch films, in that I'm ultimately just going to be talking about myself for 600 words or 100 words or 800 words or however long I'm allowed. And it's just, and it ended up being that way with Synecdoche as well, is that I was writing it, I was feeling like I'm actually just psychoanalyzing my reaction to it, you know, rather than talking about the film itself. The film itself is very elastic.
Yeah, and I think in that way it produces a lot of really interesting criticism, but not necessarily good criticism. I mean, I personally feel like what I wrote about the film is a little too sort of in my own head.
And I think that the critical response, something Karina was saying before, is, you know, Minola's piece and Ebert's piece also were very, very personal, very, very sort of first person. And I think the film, you know, it's almost impossible to sort of, I'm going to completely, you know, 100% objective, which is impossible anyway. But I think it works. I mean, yes, there's always that danger of somebody, you know, getting really sort of, you know, into themselves. And that was the night I saw it when I was very depressed. It wasn't so much that, oh wow, I totally identify with that. It's just the ideas, that things that just made me think about, you know, and that again is something I had not really experienced in a film. I mean, often we'll find a character and we'll say, oh yeah, I can totally relate to that. And it's not that it's you know, it's a pure sort of ego thing. It's something like much bigger, working on a deeper subconscious level.
Well, one of the reasons why each successive viewing pays off so much for me is because I find myself picking a new scene every time and really paying attention to a solid idea contained in that scene that I never even thought of the other time I saw it, or, you know, picking up new things every time.
The whole thing with the pills, the whole sense of rot as being a part and parcel of old age or aging in any kind of way, even getting past middle age, that every new ailment, every new ache and pain has this incredible visceral reminder of your mortality, and how do you deal with that. And I said, you know, after I wrote my initial review of Cannes for IndieWire, I talked about it a little bit on my blog, and I quoted some description by Vladimir Nabokov of Samuel Beckett that I thought really summed up the film very well, and the whole sort of feeling of moist uncomfortableness that sort of suffuses the physicality of Caden's character. And then somebody wrote and said, well, you know, that's just life, man. You know, we eat, we drink, we shit, we die. Why should we be uncomfortable with it? And it's like, well, yeah, it's nice for you, you fucking hippie. But the film wants you to be uncomfortable with it. I mean, it definitely wants you to be uncomfortable. That's the shot of Caden, you know, with a spatula poking at his own feces is like, you know, a lot of people are just going to check out there. And yet, you know, this is what people worry about when they get older. You know, they deal with it in different ways. You know, someone less neurotic than Caden is going to have a better self-support system to confront those things, but they're there. They're there.
It's really astonishing how he addresses those things. It's always a terrible fucking surprise. It's like, what the hell is that growing on me now? What is going on? You know, I have to go to the doctor for this now. I can't believe that. I'm only. Oh, wait a minute. I am. I'm 35. Right. And so, you know, that compression of time as well is a wonderful thing. Like the first day in the film is actually 6 months, isn't it? Yeah. You know, it's unbelievable. And at the end, when he's aging terribly, his second daughter Ariel, she never gets any older. For him, it's always the same age. And so it's always this sort of, she's only been gone for a week. No, it's been a year. I need to buy you a calendar. And but I feel that. You know, don't you feel that? Absolutely. I can't believe it's December.
I mean, that play between like what is actually happening and what is happening in his brain, and the way that those two things are fudged constantly is really fascinating. And I mean, just in terms of his ailments, I always go back to that scene where he's waiting for the reviews in the bar, and Claire is sort of sleeping on his shoulder, and he's playing with these things that are growing on his arm, and you don't know if they're actually growing there or if he's just really stressed out, and so he's thinking that something's growing there.
It's just, you know, it's inexorable, and the movie is about that inexorability. It's also about solipsism, because, and I think one of the cleverest things about it is that, the movie does not in and of itself condemn self-examination, because how on earth could it? But by the same token, there's this very funny thing that happens in the movie that, while Caden is exploring something that he wants to make brutal and truthful, the world is literally outside coming to an end. It's an apocalypse
And he can't
movie
see
as
it.
well, and he can't see it or he won't see it.
And poor people are being rounded up into a bus that reads Funland with all the windows painted, with all these calmly happy faces on them.
Yeah, well,
There's some self-awareness about the film too, right? Because he is, this artist creating himself. Here's Hoffman, sounds like Kaufman. Here's Emily Watson playing Samantha Morton, and they're often mistaken for one another, aren't they? I mean, there is so much real brilliance in that self-awareness, and even the eulogy that the priest delivers on stage that says, fuck everybody. Yeah, I agree. Amen. That's it. It's that kind of solipsism that you're talking about, I think, is aware that he's aware of that.
and one of the things that makes the film so watchable, provided you are hooked into it, is how it actually is rather brisk. It's like, whoa, the switches, the things that come into play. It's not 5 minutes after Diane Wiest character shows up, almost, that she's, in a sense, taken over and changed the dynamic and made this play within a play within a play that's supposed to be life within life within life, and every time one character comes in and changes the dynamic, it brings up a whole new set of questions that you haven't even begun to address.
It seems like it's sort of this distillation of all the things that he's been working on so far. Like when the Diane Wiest character as Caden goes in and changes the play, it's almost like when Donald begins to write the screenplay and adaptation, and they start having the three be the structure for the film, as sort of action film finale. And so that's Andrew, I'll let you talk about it. How you've read the original screenplay, and that whole priest role, that whole speech was not in it originally, but somehow, to put it in there, he's got someone else directing it, and someone else inserting it, and someone else doing this thing, and so someone else is taking control of the film at that point. And very literally, we're kind of, as you say, tumbling over each other.
I think it's interesting how you mentioned adaptation. I mean, the idea, of course, the doppelganger idea, which is an adaptation. I mean, and he took that so far as to, I think, wasn't the official Oscar nomination for Charlie and Donald Kaufman. I mean, he even extended it beyond the work, and here we have the idea of a doppelganger again, but in, obviously in a much different way. But so, I mean, I guess I'd ask all of you. I mean, do you find yourself thinking about, what is he thinking? I mean, what goes through Charlie Kaufman's mind? I mean, that's one thing I find myself asking more than other directors. Like, I really wonder, what does he think about these ideas of death and all? Because death in the film is just horrible. Like, pretty much everyone's death is painful and alone, or murder, or it's there's never just sort of this sort of peaceful someone going off.
His own death is almost blissful, because
His is,
I mean,
but
it's when it's actually happening to you, you sort of fade away, but it's watching like the loss of other people that.
But he can't even
really
do that
hurts.
on his own. He has to get a stage direction,
Right.
even how to die. So.
But also, just to go back really quickly to this idea, this criticism that it's a sprawling film. I mean, when I look at it, I see it as being something that's put together with a great economy. I mean, I don't know what could be cut from this film.
Kaufman is so confident as a filmmaker. If you look at the scene where, right before Hazel meets up with Caden on the bench, framed right behind Caden, you will see on the very left side a sliver of Sammy's trench coat appear in the frame, and it's right up against this tree on the other side, so it's really hard to see. You can miss it the first time, but that's why repeat viewings reward.
He's also there a little before when Caden goes out to get the mail.
In the
And
morning.
also, he's walking his daughter to school.
Yeah.
And when he's eavesdropping on him in the funeral parlor.
So much for the idea that all this thing is a dream that happens to him after the faucet smashes him in the head. That doesn't hold up now.
When I talked to Kaufman, it was, getting back to something that Andrew was talking about, when I talked to Kaufman, it was really difficult for me not to say, how did you do this? That's the only question I wanted to ask over and over again. I had a whole list, and I wanted to appear, very dignified and not. But really, I just wanted to know how you did that. How did you know about this? How did you know about what this feeling is like? I mean, I have 2 kids, and I've never seen that sort of fear and desire that you have for your children. Articulated in quite this way. That fear of growing older. I can't believe I feel the way I do sometimes. I never used to feel this way before. And like I was saying, it did make me feel pretty depressed for about 2 weeks after watching the film, in not a real specific way, just sort of an existential way. I looked at all the people around me, and I began to see their see them aging in a way. I feel like, oh, this is all temporary. This is all temporary.
Well, there is. I mean, it's funny because in a sense we're tempted to snicker a bit at Caden when he talks about wanting to do something brutal and honest and truthful. The funny thing about this movie is that it is, in fact, all of those things. It is incredibly brutal. The stuff with Olive is beyond cruel in a way.
And a word about that actress that plays older Olive,
Yeah.
Robin Weigert, right? Calamity Jane from Deadwood. This is the third time through. This is the first time I noticed. She's unbelievable. But yeah, it is. That scene is particularly devastating because I cannot imagine being estranged from my kids, and I can't imagine having to have this conversation with my child, and then I cannot imagine not being forgiven. It's just it's a string of outrages and calamities.
And then that idea of being asked to beg for forgiveness for something completely fabricated, and going through that scene is so hard to watch. That is absolutely painful. I mean, again, as a parent, it's,
and I love that sort of the secondary nature of that confession, right? There, you hear the translation going back and forth from English to German and then German. There's something so, again, the doppelganger thing, I guess, but there's something so perverse about that, really. There's always this sort of separation between the characters, between him and particularly and his child. And I love the image of the stool being covered with blood in his studio. There's this idea of male creation versus female creation, too.
Absolutely.
Could the stool actually be covered in blood? Well, in a way, in a sense, it could be, because, guys feel like they're giving birth when they're writing sometimes,
Yeah, you guys in particular are very, and Andrew wrote about this at length, and maybe you could talk a little more about this because it might not be evident to some of the people who are watching it where we're coming from in terms of talking about the Jungian psychology aspect of it, and maybe we could lay it out a bit.
I mean, again, that is just something that, Kaufman, I've not seen him say anything directly about that. It's just that when I was laying in the apartment for days after the film in depression, that's what I just found myself starting to think about, and I really did start pulling off all my Jung books off the shelf and started reading about that whole, the process of personality integration and becoming a person and Jung's various stages, and I started to sort of map it up against the film, and this could just be my own need for a better level of understanding, but there are these sort of various phases that you go through where you create this sort of, you have to deal with your shadow, you have to deal with your darker side, and then there is the idea of the other, which is exactly what Sammy is, and then one of the last stages is the incorporating of our opposite gender, the anima, the animus, and whereas Caden needs to sort of envelop his anima, which he does. I mean, he all throughout the film he's mistaken for a woman several times, which is very odd. I mean, there's nothing when he's on the phone and there's nothing really that he sounds like a woman or looks like a woman, but people mistake him for that. And at the end, he becomes
And there's the vice versa with the character played by Diane Wiest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think it's a great read because that doesn't happen until after he confronts his shadow, until
That's
after
right.
Tom Noonan comes into the film.
That's right.
And I think it's validated as well within the screenplay because they say that's not Freudian at all. What does that have to do with Freud? And of course, there's this very public split between Freud and Jung.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. But of course, there's also the Travis Bickle philosophy. One should not spend one's time engaged in morbid self-attention. One should try to become a person like every other person.
Well, one of the key scenes for me is when Sammy approaches Caden and actually gives him the address to where Adele is living, because he wants to see him lose more of himself, which is such a fascinating, such a creepy concept to just to lose yourself. The very fact that that he distances himself from Caden, becomes Ellen, is another form of death. I mean, Caden is already dead, technically, in that respect.
Yeah, and also there are very few concepts more fraught than the idea of cleaning your ex-wife's apartment.
There is this feeling for me, though, that a lot of the lack of playfulness that some critics have leveled on this, you can find that playfulness in the play and language, and you see the play and language a lot. Like being John Malkovich, there's the receptionist who I don't know what you're saying. That doesn't
My name
understand.
is Warts.
Right. You have warts, and so it's a very. I think that is very playful. When he says, "Did you say urologist? Neurologist?"
Yeah.
Oh, I just thought you said. So there is the playfulness in the film. I think the film at many times is really funny. The ultimate feeling of the film is not great.
It's funny, but it's mordant. I don't think there's very much lightness to it. But the funny thing about Sam is that, of course, in killing himself, he succeeds where Caden has failed. You know,
Yeah.
but the suicide goes. It all goes all the way back to the rehearsals from Death of a Salesman, when the actor's like, "How did you like I did that crash? I tried to do it ambivalently this time."
That's the actor later that can't walk, right?
Right.
So in a lot of ways, Sammy is the successful version of Sammy. The Shadow is the more successful version of Caden in a way. He gets Hazel.
Yeah.
He has a successful flirtation and affair with Hazel. He successfully kills himself.
All the things that are hard for Caden are easy for Sammy.
It's one of the things he said in an interview, Kaufman, which really kind of made me smile, was that he said film is not like theater in that we go see a movie. Actually, when you see a play, every night something different can and usually does happen on stage.
Yeah.
And he said he wanted a film like that where each time you see it, you notice something different. And I mean, obviously that he succeeded in that, and I thought that was pretty damn impressive, actually.
Yeah. I mean, can you think of a film that has that same effect to that extent? Because I can't.
No, I couldn't.
A little bit in Rivette sometimes. And I don't know that Rivette is necessarily a conscious influence on Kaufman, but there is a bit in Love on the Ground where the characters played by Jane Birkin and Genevieve Chaplin are rehearsing something, and the director says, "Oh, we have to get somebody in here to actually play these two." So there's a germ of the idea of synecdoche in there, but it could be entirely coincidental.
That's interesting because Va Savoir is also about stagecraft and the sort of the blending, the shifting. That's interesting, Rivette. Well, I would say in response to that, probably I've only felt this way about movies that are very subjective, that are very much, that slippery for me for whatever reason. That, like you say, the first time I see it, I'm sort of struggling to keep along, but the second time I see it, I'm devastated by it for whatever reason. I don't know how popular this answer will be, but I like some of Wes Anderson's films. Like the first time I saw Royal Tenenbaums, I didn't really get it. The second time I saw it, I haven't been able to see it again since my father passed away. And so there is something that about some of these films that acts different, like a stage play, that acts increasingly subjective the more that you see it. That ultimately becomes a mirror to your experience.
I think the comparison with Anderson is apt, the way he packs the frame with a lot of details that you're not necessarily going to catch on the first time, particularly Tenenbaums, which is supposed to be New York City, but is very much a completely created reality. Obviously the tone is a lot different. Anderson is, I'd say, a bit more, a bit sunnier, and just more wry rather than rueful. But there is, it's not as if they're lacking in tragic sense either. But I think the comparison is absolutely apt.
And I think we should be careful not to describe this film as a movie about depression, because I don't think it is at all. I think it's about experience, and that, if some aspects of experience are depressing, so be it. But there's also the little moments that make that perhaps worth it.
Of all the things that he suffers from, I'm not sure that depression is actually one of them.
No.
I mean, I think that depression is maybe an end syndrome.
Right. And the thing that I find about almost all of Kaufman's films is that I feel less alone as I'm watching them, even though they may be about loneliness or about sadness or disconnection. That at the end of Eternal Sunshine, my wife and I cried like little children, for no real discernible reason. We couldn't look at each other and explain to each other why we were both having that reaction, but just this feeling like, thank God that some other person thinks like this or feels this way. It's actually less lonesome to have a Kaufman in the world than otherwise. And I didn't find Synecdoche depressing either. I just found it to be extraordinarily revelatory, and it forced me to go to places I wasn't necessarily prepared to go that day.
I found Synecdoche, New York to be such a riveting experience. First few times I watched that ending, I feel joy, surprisingly enough, because I am watching an uncompromised, apocalyptic vision that has not been watered down, and I feel as if the ending is earned, and whereas so many movies do not earn their endings.
Yeah, something to be said for that. I mean, we're sitting here now in, mid-December, and we've all been watching the big, end of year, Oscar hopefuls, and it's just, I think Karina pointed this out in a recent review, that they're passive experiences. You're watching a film is even if it's about there's some material to the subject matter. Everything from Nazi guilt to aging and all that. It's just all hammered in, and then you have this film, and like you said, it requires a bit of work, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean.
The end has this really beautiful simplicity of it, and it reminds me of that line from Philip Larkin, what remains of us is love. These two people who are pretty much almost practically total strangers being able to experience a very deep empathy and tell each other that they love each other it's God, it's almost hippie-ish. But it is a very what can remain is love, or what was the old thing? We must love one another or die, said Auden, and Cyril Connolly said, no, we must love one another and die. And that's the end to me. We must love one another and die. To inevitable, one is a moral imperative, the other is an inevitability.
It really reminded me of the end of Weekend as well, the Godard film in a way, where it was sort of done. Everybody, it's done. As all things are done, it's completely done.
And certainly some of those final shots, the widescreen of him just sort of moving through this landscape, yeah, it's very Weekend.
I remember when Caden was talking with Hazel. You ever notice that Hazel's answering machine never changes?
Yes.
So it's as if in the future, when Caden talks with Hazel, when she's dead, it's like he's talking to a time machine, like he's reaching out to the younger Hazel, the Hazel that he never connected with. And it's so heartbreaking when he tells her that, I wanted to make the play about that one day because that was we were together because that was the happiest day of my life.
It's very, very interesting, and I think it might be worthwhile to talk about the way Kaufman writes female characters. I mean, he's largely surrounded by females throughout the film, some more sympathetic than others.
You're one of the few female critics that I've spoken to personally who really liked the film. Two others I know actually just hated it.
Well,
Thought there was
what are
nothing in there for me. They just felt it was, they saw it a lot as male fantasy, and they said, what is in there for me? That was a line they both said. And
I don't see it as a male fantasy at all. And in fact, I mean, he has that line where he's like, well, I think it might have been easier if I was a woman. I mean, I think that the character's relationship to his own gender is much more complex than it just being the average impenetrable for women male fantasy.
How is it a male fantasy? Because he gets to sleep with characters played by Michelle Williams.
I mean, all of the sex in the movie is it is fraught with so much tension. It never brings him happiness.
I mean, that's one of the running jokes in the movies. Do you cry when you're having sex?
And actually, I had a conversation with a man about it once, and he said something to me about how he thought that it had a lot to do with the way that men make decisions based on sexual impulse. And maybe there's a little in that, but I think that's maybe the least of it, the thing that's least interesting to me about it.
He's constantly resisting his sexual.
Exactly.
I mean, he can't even recognize a sexual impulse, except in a certain mood and a certain mode. And it takes Sam, to really. What are you going to say? The whole speech about the shimmer. It takes Sam to recognize what Caden can't articulate.
Well, that gets back to, I mean, was something else that made me think of Jung, because in Jung's theory is that men act more on the rational, right, whereas women are more intuitive, and how that sort of plays into their art. I mean, he's just spending so much time constructing, directing, never living, right? I mean, he's always directing 5 minutes behind him, kind of thing. It's and then only at the last minute does he realize, like, oh wow, yeah, this one day is really all that matters. I mean, it's I agree with what you said earlier about not being depressing, but the tragedy of it is just unbelievable.
Yeah, the sense of fragmentation too in his life post Adele, when he says, "I gotta find my daughter." No, my real daughter, my first daughter.
And he actually forgets his second daughter's name.
Yeah, it's very, very, very sad. But I mean, and it's also interesting how later in the film, the scenes tend to have a more realistic feel as the film progresses. With the exception of the sojourn back at Hazel's burning house. But once you've got that huge warehouse set established, then parts of it become very cut and dried in terms of depicting artistic process and practical matters involved in making even a smaller scale theatrical endeavor, and it takes on a slightly different tone in those scenes.
I love the house on fire. I love it. The first time I saw it, I thought, wow. The first time in the film that I saw it, I thought, hey, that's interesting to me. By the end of it, it feels less threatening and more warm, like a hearth, if you will, when they're lying in bed and there's sort of fires flickering against their face and everything. In the beginning, it's like, yeah, I like the house, but I'm afraid of dying in the fire, sort of thing. At the end of it, there's this sort of real warmth and everything, and it just, so much you can pull out of that, I think. The fear of a 36-year-old woman buying a house on her own, being alone, and then by the end of it, the sort of grandparents in a bed, in front of a fire with this legacy behind them, and Yeah, very sad. Again, very tragic because we know what the reality is. The house is burning down. But if we can look at the house as sort of, well, it's clearly a metaphor. Here comes the hate mail. Right? It's a metaphor. But
No, that's what got people hung up the most, right? A lot of critics
It
just
did.
stopped there. There was a
Right.
house on fire, and I didn't get it. I hate this
Right.
movie. You know.
these same people will be the ones that are pounding the drum for better American films, and why does Hollywood give us Clint Eastwood, and why do we do these things to ourselves as an industry? But here it is, right under their noses, and I wonder if this film would have been better received if it were done by the Dardenne brothers, or if it were Godard's last experiment on digital video or something. I wonder if it would have been better received if it were subtitled, because it seems like with American film there's this real resistance to the quality that we actually do produce. You talk about the greatest film year ever, 1939. How many real people actually can name more than 2 or 3 films from 1939? Maybe 5, maybe 6 films from 1939. And I think we make at least that many great films in the United States every year. It's just a matter of our being open to that possibility. I mean, I think Synecdoche is really a masterpiece. I think it's really going to be one of those movies that a lot of people look back on, if they have any kind of introspection at all, with regret that they missed the boat the first time around. It is kind of a remarkable piece, especially to be produced by this industry.
And for a movie that's so solipsistic and can be so much about the experience of feeling alone, I think it benefits from being watched with a crowd and being seen, in the traditional movie theater environment.
You know what I like about Kaufman, though, is that he does have these grace notes in all of his films, it seems like, where one of the characters says, "I'm so happy right now. I'm so happy right now." There is this awareness, and the tragedy of this film maybe is that he doesn't realize it till it's over, till it's too late. But like Eternal Sunshine, one of the devastating moments of that is when he says, "I'm just so happy here." It is these grace notes, I think, that make all of the sadness and the tragedy of the rest of it sort of bearable. It wouldn't be a tragedy if there was no happiness.
Even the song, the Little Person, which Kaufman wrote, the lyrics of that song are exactly what Caden is. Just content to live with his life and happy to maybe meet somebody who feels the same way. But Caden doesn't do any of those things. He doesn't actually ever find that peace.
That's the dream.
The function of the artist, Milan Kundera and a bunch of other people have said, is to ask more questions. And this picture depicts a lot of states and asks a lot of questions about them.
And more importantly, it doesn't do it, I think, in a way that blocks conversation. It doesn't ever give answers. It doesn't. It presents scenarios. It presents ways through which you work out your own issues, perhaps against that prism, like all great art does. I think
it continually yields up these materials that force you to rethink about them all over again. In a way, once it makes contact with your own mind and consciousness, it becomes a self-generating piece of art.
I compared the film to Nietzsche's Abyss, as that sort of thing that he says. It's like you look into it, it looks into you. It's just it's an archaeologist or an anthropologist of the viewer, which is. It's rare. I don't know that there have ever been that many artists that have done that with this sort of seeming effortlessness. I had a feeling watching the film too that this work could be produced in no other medium. This could not be poetry. This could not be literature. This could not be opera. It has to be what it is, and it's edifying for me to have a film that is film, that is filmic.
Well,
it's the only medium that could carry this.
I'm sure they'll find a way to turn a Broadway musical.
Right.
Video game.
Did anyone see Cronenberg's Fly opera?
I did not.
Actually, this might be an interesting video game. There are multiple possibilities for gameplay.
So,
I'm not one of the guys. I'm not one of those folks who believes in the utility of art per se. But you'd be. I think if you're engaging it and you say, well, it didn't hit you where you live, you'd probably be lying. And that's the funny thing about it. When you talk about there being no snark, no, there isn't snark. He's going for an emotional response with this thing, and I think he gets it. And it's something. I think a lot of the time these days people feel put out to be even asked to have an emotional response, like a real emotional response, not an emotional response that is conversant with your social training, where you tear up at a movie where you're supposed to tear up at a movie. This movie demands a genuine, as much of a genuine, visceral, palpable emotional response as what he's put into it, and that is one of the things that makes the film unique, and it is one of the things that makes a lot of its detractors incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah. I just want to know how many times it's going to take till I can watch the film without needing a drink.
It's affirming of what we do, I think, in a way, in that, you know, it is like going to church when I go to a movie. You know, I want to get filled. I want to feel something. I don't want Diane Lane in front of a bank of violins to tell me what to feel. I want something that gives me insight into my life, or, you know, the life of the people that I love. And so, in that way, I think Kaufman films are extraordinarily valuable, because they do that. They allow you the sort of prism, the scrim through which you can look at your own life and examine the way that things are. And it fulfills, I think, what art at its best can do. You know, it can allow you to have these cathartic expressions. And we talk about tragedy, I guess catharsis is the end result. And so, you know, that expression of emotion, like you say, is 100% genuine. He never hates film. He never hates theater. He never hates Caden. You know, he doesn't present us black and white, but that doesn't judge either. And I think that's really remarkable. Nice movie. I'm glad I saw it 3 times.
Every time I see it, I'm more convinced that I need to see it more.
Yeah.
I think we should thank Charlie Kaufman for making such an extraordinary film, and everybody at the powers that be for getting us in here to talk about it. This has been really something.
I hope he makes another and more.
Yeah, I hope so too. Can't wait for the next one.